Hi guys, Miss Francis here. I'd like to finish up our cellular respiration unit. Before we go to the note packet though, what I would like for us to do is complete our flow chart. So this is what we had gotten up to. We were talking about Krebs cycle, where the next stage is called oxidative phosphorylation, which includes the ETC and chemiosmosis. So in order to do ETC and chemiosmosis, we have already gotten 10 NADHs and 2 FADH2s. Now, those 2 FADH2s came from the Krebs cycle. For those 10 NADHs, we got 6 from Krebs, 2 from glycolysis, and 2 from the link reaction. And then the main point of doing oxidative phosphorylation is to make 32 ATP. This is where the majority of our ATP is made. We're also going to make 12 waters when oxygen is the final acceptor of the electrons at the end of the ETC. Also, I don't know if we wrote this in last time, but in order to do Krebs cycle, we're going to use 6 waters. So just to make sure that you have that in there as well. So if we look at the balanced equation for aerobic respiration, we can take each part and identify where it was used. So if we look here, glucose, C6H12O6, was used for glycolysis. Our 6 oxygens were used during the ETC to produce 12 waters because oxygen acted as the final electron acceptor. Those 6 waters were used in the Krebs cycle. As far as the 6 carbon dioxides, we made 2 during the link reaction and 4 during Krebs cycle. And again, we made 32 ATPs during, technically it's not during ETC, it's during chemiosmosis. And then 2 ATPs during the Krebs cycle and 2 ATPs during glycolysis. So now let's go to the note packet and finish it up. So how does body temperature relate to metabolism? Metabolism is the sum of all of your body's processes, one of those processes being cellular respiration. Well, the point of cellular respiration is to make energy, right? But of that energy, only 40% is used by that organism in order to fuel its cells' activities. So what happens to the other 60%? Well, it gets lost as heat. So what happens to that heat then? Well, 2 different types of organisms exist. You've got cold-blooded and warm-blooded. Cold-blooded organisms can also be referred to as ectothermic or poikilothermic, where they cannot retain this heat. So their external or their internal temperature is dictated by the external temperature. In other words, a cold-blooded organism is usually going to be the same temperature as whatever environment it's in. Whereas warm-blooded organisms, known as endothermic or homeothermic organisms, retain part of their heat in order to regulate their internal body temperatures. So if we look at this graph, what does it show about homeotherms versus ectotherms? Well, ectotherms have a large variety of body temperatures, whereas endotherms, like this bobcat here, which is a mammal, usually maintains a fairly constant body temperature. In order to maintain that fairly constant body temperature, its metabolism has to consistently work. So a bobcat, an endotherm's metabolic rate would be greater than an ectotherm's metabolic rate. So how do poikilotherms regulate their body temperatures, right? Because they can't retain heat. What they actually do is they change their position, or they change their body orientation, they change their location, or they change the time of day that they are active. So for example, butterflies will vibrate their wings to increase the muscle temperature which is needed for flying. Turtles will bask in the sun to warm up on a hot day. Desert animals might be nocturnal to avoid extreme daily temperatures, or during the day, they might even hide under rocks or burrow under the sand to prevent themselves from getting too hot. Lizards might press against the surface in order to prevent heat loss. Furthermore, that exposes their dark colored top to the radiation that comes from the sun. So here are examples of what these organisms can do. They can reorient themselves, they can find shelter, they can do color changes, meaning if they become a darker color, they're going to be able to absorb more heat from the radiation. But how do homeotherms regulate their body temperature? Homeotherms are endotherms. Mammals and birds are the only two groups of homeotherms. And the way we regulate our body temperature is through negative feedback systems. So for example, let's say that it's cold outside, right? My hypothalamus registers that through external factors, my body is too cold. What that enables us to do is vasoconstriction and shivering, which results in our body warming up. But now let's say our body warms up too much. Our hypothalamus will pick up that our body's temperature has increased too much. Our blood vessels will dilate, we'll have vasodilation, we'll start to sweat, and our body will start to cool. Now let's say our body cools too much. Our hypothalamus will recognize that our body has cooled too much, and we'll start this whole loop all over again. That's a negative feedback system. Metabolic rate is actually inversely proportional to body size, and that's because smaller organisms have a greater surface area to volume ratio, therefore experience a larger heat loss. So if I look at an elephant as compared to a shrew has to eat almost every 2 hours in order to survive, in order to maintain its metabolism, where an elephant can go much longer without eating to do its metabolic activities. So not only do carbohydrates, such as glucose, play a vital role in metabolic pathways, but two other major fuels, such as proteins and fats, can also enter the respiratory pathways. So if we take a look at proteins first, proteins will be broken down to amino acids. The nitrogenous wastes will be eliminated, but enzymes, which are a type of protein, can enter the respiration pathway in different ways. So if we look down here, the carbon skeleton is modified by enzymes, which are technically proteins and can enter as intermediaries during glycolysis or the Krebs cycle. Now, if we look at fats are going to be broken down into glycerol and fatty acids. Glycerol can enter the aerobic pathway as G3P. And fatty acids can enter the pathway as 2 carbon compounds, such as acetyl-CoA. If we eat too many cookies, too many potato chips, too many of anything that's mostly carbohydrates, our cells can't process all of that glucose for energy. So what ends up happening is it follows the reverse reaction, and we begin to store it as fats. So that's how eating too many cookies or potato chips ends up causing you to gain fat. We addressed this already once, where negative feedback mechanisms are going to help us control our metabolism. Well, negative feedback mechanisms also help control cellular respiration. So for example, if ATP levels drop, catabolism speeds up to produce more ATP. That's an example of a negative feedback system. That concludes our cellular respiration unit. And if you have any questions, please come see me or Miss Cunningham.